are universal cartridges or converters truly universal? Are there things to look out for? No, they're not universal. They're definitely not. So that's like saying, like, is an alternator universal? Well, somewhat. Like, there's some cars that use the same alternators, but there's definitely no one universal alternator. You know what I mean? So the situation is, there's nothing that I'm aware that's really advertised as a universal. There's one called a standard international, which implies somewhat of the same thing as being universal, but there is no universal converter that works for everything, not even close. A lot of pen brands, especially ones that have been around a really long time, you know, they all developed their own proprietary cartridges or converters because basically there was no such system back in the day. And then once ballpoint pens and stuff like that became more reliable around the 40s, 50s, well, they came out in the 40s, the 50s and 60s is when they really started to become reliable enough to really start to kill out the fountain pen. So fountain pens, you know, manufacturers wanted to be more competitive, so they had to add degrees of convenience. So rather than forcing everybody to use bottled ink, they offered up these cartridge converters. So you had brands like Cross and Waterman and Parker and kind of these big ones that started developing their own cartridges, but, you know, it was pioneering at the time, so everyone was kind of developing their own cartridges and converters, many of them which are still around today. So it's a little frustrating because you're just like, why does Lamy use a different one than Pilot, than Parker, than Waterman? Then why are they all using these different cartridges and converters? It drives me crazy. Well, it's because they came about. You know, they've been around that long and they came about with their own system, and it was not advantageous to them necessarily to devise a standardized system. Now, I should have looked this up. I don't know exactly when. I want to say it was sometime in the 70s, but I could be completely wrong about that. Please correct me if I am wrong. But there was a standard international system that was devised that I think a bunch of manufacturers kind of jumped on. And now you're seeing a lot of pen companies that use this standard international cartridge converter. You know, Monteverde, Conklin, Edison, a lot of the smaller manufacturers will use them because, you know, nib manufacturers, you know, people that make nibs and housings and stuff like that, like Schmidt and Jovo and Bach, that sell, you know, nibs and stuff to other companies, will devise these standard international housings. So a lot of smaller pen companies use standard international because it's more economical than developing their own proprietary system. It's really the bigger companies that have been around for decades that kind of still have their own system. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, the companies that have proprietary systems, a lot of them have been around for a very long time. So I don't think it's that they necessarily, you know, they're already, this would be interesting for me to look up, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, would be to see if there is a correlation between when the standard international cartridge converter came out and what companies have their own cartridge converter system. You know, to see if all of the people that have their own system were ones that were devised before the standard international. I don't know. If there was somebody, I'm not like deeply rich in some of that like decades old pen history. That is one area that I'm not particularly strong. So that would be something interesting for me to explore a little bit. I'll have to make a note to myself to do that. But that is essentially why you aren't seeing any universal type situation. That said, one thing that you can do is if you go to gouletpens.com and you go to fountain pens, you click on fountain pens up in the top menu bar, and you look on the left side and you'll see a section that says compatible inks and refills. That you can select on standard international ink cartridges, or you can select proprietary, which is going to show you a mess of all the different proprietary ones. But if you select standard international, you can see every pen that we carry that has a standard international cartridge or converter. It's a nice little filter, and you can kind of get a quicker glance at which brands are using those standard international ones if you wanted to have more of a universal kind of situation going on. It's also worth noting that the pens that have these standard international cartridges and converters have a lot more options as far as which ink cartridges to get, because the ones that are brand specific, you can really only get that brand's ink. So Lamy only has, I don't know, 9, 10 colors or something in cartridge form. It depends on how many limited editions and stuff they have out, but you're limited to those colors. You can't get a Pilot Iroshizuku whatever in a Lamy cartridge. It's just not going to happen. Well, that's a bad example because Pilot Iroshizuku doesn't even make cartridges. Anywho, so you can't get a diamine ink in a Lamy cartridge unless you refill it yourself with an ink syringe, but that's not what the cartridge is really originally designed to do. It's meant for convenience of just popping them in and out. So if you have a pen with a standard international, such as said Conklin, you can get diamine cartridges, you can get private reserve cartridges, you can get cartridges from lots of different ink brands with large ink selections, more readily available in standard international pens than you can in proprietary ones.